If the saying, life's a beach, is really true, then this month I am really living. Go on, cue the titles. Coming up on this month's show, we give you a tour of the Outer Hebrides, we edit on the go, and we get all judgmental with some of your photos. Welcome to our September edition of Photography Online, where we're coming to you from the Outer Hebrides. Now we'll explain where they are and what they're all about throughout the duration of the show. All you need to know for now is that if you're into your photography, then this place needs to be on your wish list. Alright, so before we get this month's show on the road, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everybody who's commented that you're learning loads from our shows and that we're inspiring you to get out more with your cameras. Truly, this is our only goal, to help you improve your photography and to enthuse you to pick up your camera more often. So it's fantastic to hear that we are actually achieving this. Alright, so here we are on the Outer Hebrides, and one of the things you notice when arriving here is the number of abandoned homes which are scattered all over the islands. These caught the eye as well as the imagination of one local photographer.
My name's John Marr. I moved to the Isle of Harris from Manchester in 2002, and it took me about 7-8 years of living here before I finally seriously got into photography, found a way of photographing the place in a way that I liked, and then eventually got into photographing the interiors of some of the abandoned croft houses. I was keen to find a way of photographing the island in a way that interested me. You know, I wasn't particularly, I've never really been into the landscape side of things, which of course the Hebrides is fantastic for. But the old abandoned stuff, even when I look back to long before we moved up here, you know, I used to come on holiday, I've looked back at my little holiday snaps, a lot of that was like old abandoned stuff. So I've obviously had that interest all along. And it was old houses, vehicles or whatever. It was all sort of exterior stuff shot out using the landscape as a backdrop. And it was one night when one of those houses I actually ventured inside because I wanted to place a light inside the house, and that's when I spotted that there was quite a lot of stuff left inside. So I went back the following day and started photographing that interior, and then that was the trigger really, that I then started looking for more and more abandoned houses like that. Generally, I would just leave it exactly as was. There was an interior of a house where there's a picture of a dog on the mantelpiece and on the other end of the mantelpiece a picture of a cat. But there was, at my foot of the tripod, there was a little skeleton of a bird, and it was just out of the shot, so I just gave it a little flick with my foot to push it into the shot. And it was only later when I was looking at the picture on the computer, I came up with the title, The Dog, the Cat and the Bird. I thought that was quite clever. I was just doing it kind of on and off between, say, 2010, but in 2013, that's when it really accelerated for me, because we got the opportunity to exhibit the images at the main gallery in Stornoway and Lanta. You know, once you're given something and there's a deadline, that makes me get a move on. So that became I did get obsessed. I was driving all over the place looking for them. Once I got into digital photography, it didn't take me long to realise that I needed to be working on full frame. I just like the bigger the sensor, the better. 5D, and then next one was a Canon 6D, which I still use today. So I haven't got the mega resolution camera, but the full frame thing is important to me. I wanted to do some really big prints, and my pathway to producing high quality big prints, I couldn't afford the medium format digital. So I went the large format film route and had those digitally scanned, and then they're capable of producing really amazing quality prints at large sizes. About a third of the images in that exhibition were shot on film, so there was no light. I just relied on natural light for those. The digital ones, like the one with the TV set in this room, I'd shot, there's probably about 10 or 12 separate exposures that I layered on top, because I would selectively light different parts of the room and then blend those together to create that kind of look that I was after. You know, when the dynamic range, it goes beyond what the camera can cope with. Rather than raising the shadows artificially after, I would actually do it by lighting the darker areas. You find something like this and you go inside, and sometimes, you know, there isn't actually anything in there. And that was not really of interest. It's the ones that had the belongings left behind that were particularly good. Initially, I didn't know or particularly look into why the houses were abandoned. I was more interested in just trying to get interesting images from it. But of course, then as the images became more widely known, people made contact with me that gave me some of the family history of the houses, and they're quite varied. You know, some of it was just the old folks passed on, and there was nobody left in the family to move into the house, or quite often they're not fit for renovation. You have to be aware that, you know, living here, they're not just an abandoned house. To most people it is, but there are people living probably not far away from here that have connections with that house. So it's sort of treat things with a bit of respect.
If you'd like to see more of John's work, then we've put links to his website in the description down below. And if you happen to be in Lewis over the coming months, then I highly recommend visiting his exhibition at the Nest Historical Society. Now, behind me here is a typical example of one of the abandoned buildings you'll see dotted throughout these islands. And come on, we're going to have a wee look inside. I will give you the grand tour. Heading into the darkness. Now, watch your footing. We have a rather nice mummified sheep skeleton in here. And then coming further into the house, we've got a nice twin tub. You might be able to see through here. Do your washing in there, and you've got a fantastic view as well. You'll be able to see out the window there. And let's go around the corner and do watch your step here. You have to step on the door. This is the kitchen, and these stoves. So many of these were left in these houses. They were just too heavy to shift, and my grandparents actually had one of these as well, a little bit further up the island, and lovely stoves, and yeah, a very nice place to do your cooking. And finally, come with me around the corner. We've got a treat to finish off with. What you're actually stepping on here, what I'm stepping on, it's not just mud. Oh no, it's sheep poo. Yes, it is. And here we have the toilet facilities, which I'll let you have a look at. And you can tell, obviously, it's male sheep that have been in here because they've missed the bowl. Now, we usually bring you the show from our base on the Isle of Skye, which you can actually see right over there in the gap between the hills across the water. And regular viewers of the show will be aware that we're in the middle of a countdown of the top 10 locations on the island. So let's head back across the water and see what's at number 3 this month.
Our number 3 location on the Isle of Skye is without doubt the most iconic of all landmarks on Skye, if not Scotland. With over 200,000 visitors each year, it can only be the Old Man of Skye.
You thought this was going to be number 1, didn't you? Go on, you did, didn't you? Admit it.
You don't need to climb up the well-trodden trail to see the Old Man of Skye, as it can be seen from many miles away. In fact, it featured in the background in our number 10 location when Ruth kicked off our countdown at Loch Fada way back in January. Climbing the 500 metres up to one of the elevator viewpoints will probably see you duly rewarded, and the prize for the eyes is right there in front of you, beckoning you onwards and upwards. Unless you want a really long walk, there's only one way up Skye, and that's on the main trail which starts at the car park.
If you've come to Skye to take photographs and you want to get here about an hour before dawn, expect the walk to take 30 to 90 minutes, slightly longer if you're not that fit.
The walk up is straightforward, but does get steep in places. Once you crest the first hill, the Old Man itself comes into view, although it often blends in with the background and is easily missed. The mountain itself is called Skye, and the famous standing rock which lies in its shadow is what's known as the Old Man.
It's not until this point on the path that the Old Man itself becomes obvious as it protrudes above the skyline. As we get closer, it will become more separated from the background.
There are other surrounding rocks of various shapes and sizes too, and collectively these are known as the Sanctuary. Some have specific names, such as Needle Rock and the Cathedral. The rocks make for great silhouettes, so my advice for your first photo stop would be from somewhere between the cliff face and the rocks themselves. The position of the rising sun varies hugely here, depending on the time of year, so there's not one specific place to recommend.
Make sure you stay well away from the base of the cliffs. There's daily rock falls, and if one of those falls on your head, it's probably going to ruin your day. This poor chap didn't heed my advice.
Once you've got a silhouette shot of the rocks against the pre-dawn sky, you want to keep heading north along the path, ready for when the first direct light hits the scene.
Most photographers, when they come to Skye, will end up standing here, which is why we know it as Photographer's Mound. But this spot isn't ideal. The cathedral overlaps the Old Man of Skye slightly and we don't get any separation. The pinnacles also break the skyline just a little bit. Our number 3 location requires just a little bit more climbing, so follow me.
Continue along the path and over this stile. This feels wrong as you'll now lose sight of the very scene you want to be shooting, but fear not, when it comes back into view, it will be so much better.
Once you get to the ridge here, you want to aim for the rocks just up at the top there. As you close in on them, prepare to have your breath taken away. Well, granted you can see the view that is, but let's give it a go anyway. There it is, view number 3. If you get here and the cloud does come down, don't despair. Make sure you're patient, wrap up, and you may well be rewarded.
If you get good light here, it could be the best photo you'll ever take. the summer months, it is not unusual to get an inversion layer here, and in winter months, it's often dusted with snow. With the Coolin Mountains as a backdrop, this truly is a world-class view.
Once you snapped your award-winning shots from up there, you have a couple of options. You can return via the same path and get in amongst the pinnacles, as there's endless compositional opportunities. Or if you're feeling fit, you can go up over the summit and down the other side. But I'm not going to do that today because I wouldn't see anything.
Don't take all the photos though. Leave some for the day tourists who will start to flood the area from around 9 AM, so you want to be done and dusted by then.
So many of you guessed that Star would be at number 1, and understandably so, but the good news is that we still have 2 more to go, so don't miss those over the coming couple of shows. Now, we often get messages from viewers asking how they can support the channel, and obviously we spend a lot of time and effort in putting together the shows, and this comes at a cost, but we did make it very clear from the start that we wanted to keep this available to everybody to watch for free, and this wouldn't be changing, so fear not. If you do want to support us though, we do host a monthly webinar which we call MC2 Live, which occurs on the second Sunday of every month. There's a £7.50 registration fee to join, and the show lasts for around an hour and a half. It's hosted by myself, and I get other team members involved to edit images live, answer your questions as they come in, discuss camera skills, critique photos, and much more besides. It is fairly similar to this show, except that it's live, and it has the added excitement and a real community atmosphere as well. If you're interested in joining us for that, there is a link down below. All right, well, back to our location today, the Outer Hebrides. Now, these are islands which we know extremely well, and ones we've been running photography holidays to for a few years now. Let's get an insight into what we get up to and learn a little more about why this place is so appealing to photographers. Scotland is well acknowledged for drawing photographers from all over the world to come and admire its natural beauty and iconic landmarks. Although the list of locations is endless, there are a few which are typically found on most photographers' wish lists, and right up there among the best are the Outer Hebrides. A chain of islands 130 miles long separate the mainland from the wild Atlantic, but it's the most northerly of these islands which holds the most potential for photographers. Just a 2-hour ferry journey from Photography Online HQ on the Isle of Skye, Harris and Lewis offers a very different landscape to its neighbours, much of which is unique. With world-class beaches, 5,000-year-old stone circles and rugged coastline battered by the North Atlantic elements, Harris and Lewis is a worthy addition to any photographer's bucket list, regardless of how far you need to come and how much effort it takes to get here.
I've travelled quite a long way to get here. I live just outside of Seattle, Washington, so it involved 2 flights, a bus, a train, another bus, and then a ferry, and lots and lots of driving.
Each year we run a few photography trips to Harris and Lewis, but we do it in style by taking over our very own 19th century private hunting lodge set on the shores of a remote loch surrounded by thousands of acres of its own estate land.
This is actually my 4th trip with Worldwide Explorers and the crew. I heard about this one while sitting on St. Kilda on the last trip, and Marcus kept telling me how much I would like it. And he was right.
As with all our trips, it's about striking the right balance between giving people enough information to take their photography to the next level without overwhelming them. It's also about identifying who needs what kind of help, as some people welcome more one-to-one tuition, whereas other more experienced photographers prefer to wander off by themselves with their cameras, and in locations like this, who can blame them?
I've always wanted to come to the Outer Hebrides. My skill set as a photographer coming on the trip was fairly basic. To be out in the field and just be given the confidence to use a mode that you're not familiar with, to be shown and given ideas of composition and just basically good guidance has been absolutely wonderful.
We always run our Harris and Lewis trips during the winter months. The first reason is the light. It is simply glorious. It's golden, it's soft, it's warm, and often accompanied by very ominous skies. The second reason that we run the trips during the winter months is day duration. Sunrise is typically at 8 AM and sunset typically at 5 PM. And this means it's a relatively short day. That means that we can make the most of both sunrise and sunset every single day without too much fatigue setting in.
It's a lovely feeling of being somewhere that you've wanted to go to and experience all of those different places in good company with some new lovely people.
Running our trips in the winter does increase the chances of having some really wild, stormy weather. But for photographers, this can be a really good thing, as it gives us that dramatic atmosphere that we so often crave in our landscape photographs. Sometimes though, that wild weather can be a little too much to go outside in, but for us, it's not particularly a problem. We run group presentations, critique sessions, and spend a lot of time editing people's images. And interestingly, these sessions are the ones that often people find most interesting and most memorable. So really, the bad weather for us doesn't present much of a problem.
Being able to combine all of the locations that I would like to visit in a format that was pre-arranged for you. Someone had done all the work, they'd arranged the locations, the logistics, the transfers, the transport, the optimum times for sunrise, tides, all of that planning had left me with just had to book it. I just had to turn up, and before you know it, you're on your first, and well, bound to have another one because it was a cracking holiday.
Many of our customers that we bring to Harris and Lewis are from overseas, so when we created this trip, we wanted to make it special by not only giving them access to world-class locations, but also give them a true taste of Highland hospitality. And that's where our hunting lodge comes in.
The Highland hospitality has been wonderful, and I've been quite pampered. Housekeeper, cook, everybody who's delighted to see you and welcome you back from a day wandering around and all various sorts of weather, and you get to come back and sit in a chair like this next to a roaring peat fire, and it's quite different from what I have at home.
With a gym, a sauna, steam room, 3 reading rooms with open fires, not to mention the free bar, and a games room, it's often difficult to convince people to get outside and actually take photos.
This creates a great chilled atmosphere, and not just a photographic workshop, but more a photographic experience. And people seem to really enjoy it, and it seems to really work, and that's why people come back time and time again.
Coming back to the lodge as a base has been absolutely phenomenal. I feel really privileged to have experienced Highland hospitality, food that is unbelievably fantastic. There's always somebody on hand that can sort of, take a photograph of the day and just guide you through what you can do with it to bring out the best in the photos that you've taken, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. The place itself is like walking into somebody's loved home. Friendly, warm, and I feel very, very spoiled.
With its pristine beaches, sea stacks and arches, stone circles, abandoned houses and unique landscapes all in a single island, it's easy to see, especially when you illuminate it all with some epic Hebridean light, why Harris and Lewis is such a draw for photographers. Still to come on the show, we conclude our Mastering Exposure series by taking a look at how to use a handheld light meter, we critique some of your photos in the surgery, and she's back for another lesson in School's Out. So here we are, this is the very northernmost tip of the Outer Hebrides, a location known as the Butt of Lewis, or simply the Butt if you're a local. Hopefully bringing you the show from the Butt will be a one-off experience. On this side we have the wild Atlantic coast of the Isle of Lewis, and it can be an unforgiving place. In last month's show you might remember Marcus mentioned about some of his camera gear now being at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and naturally many of you have asked what happened, so I caught up with him to hear the story.
So out there somewhere is a Canon 5D Mark IV, 35mm f1.4, that was the painful one, a Canon 70-200 zoom and a 16-35 zoom on a bag and loads of accessories.
All right, come on, Marcus. Everybody wants to know, how on earth did your bag end up at the bottom of the Atlantic?
Well, you can't really relate to it on a day like today when it's perfectly calm, but on this particular day, there was so much wind. I mean, the wind was 80 to 100 miles an hour. And I was walking to an arch, which I knew would be amazing in the conditions, and the waves were pounding into the arch, and you could see it from a long way away. Normally it would be about a 30-minute walk, but on this day, walking into the wind, it took me over an hour, and that was using all my strength. But I was so determined to get there because I could see with my eyes the waves pounding against the arch, and I was thinking the photo's going to be amazing. So, cut a long story short, managed to get there. I'm standing on the edge, and the wind, even though it's blowing strongly, it's blowing me away from the edge.
Yeah.
So my bag was behind me, 2 meters away from the edge. I'm standing there bracing myself on my tripod, which has got a camera on top. And I've been there for about 20 minutes without incident. And all of a sudden, from nowhere, the wind just changed direction. I mean, just like a flick of a switch. And I was used to kind of using the tripod to stop myself falling backwards, but now I'm bracing, pushing on the tripod. And as I'm thinking, wow, the wind suddenly changed, I saw something fly out from my peripheral vision. And I looked up and I thought, what is that? And I thought, oh, I recognise that, that's my bag. And I'm not joking, it was helicoptering around in midair. It's quite good to do that because you get rid of the midges. It was helicoptering around in midair, and all these kind of like objects were coming out of it. And I was thinking, oh look, there goes my lens, oh look, there goes the camera. And it was just going plop, plop, plop in the sea.
Heartbreaking.
And then after, I don't know, several seconds of just twirling around in the air, the bag just then dropped like a stone. And that was the end of that. The amazing thing is that obviously I don't want my gear to go in the water, but once it had happened, I just accepted the fact that it had happened. And I still had a camera, still had a tripod, so I was thinking, okay, well, at least I'm going to get a great shot out of this. But the problem was, because the wind had now come back into my face again, it's blowing all the salt spray and everything all over the front of the lens. Where are my lens cloths? In the bag. So out of all the gear that I just lost, thousands and thousands of pounds, the one thing that I wanted was a lens cloth, and I didn't have it, so I just had to go home.
It's the little things, isn't it?
It is.
It's incredible, but what a heartbreaking loss. So if anybody happens to be on the other side of the Atlantic, possibly...
Yeah, and particularly down the eastern seaboard of the US and North America, if anything washes up, then just check it's probably mine.
Yeah, it's identifiable, it's got your stickers on it.
Yeah, it's a black camera bag, can't miss it.
All right, look out for that. So the moral of the story is to never underestimate the power of the sea and the Scottish weather, and if you do, then make sure you're insured. All right, well now it's time for our 60-second editing skills, but this month there's a bit of a difference. We've been provided with a brand new high-spec laptop, so we thought we'd look at the advantages and challenges of editing on location.
power of tablets and even mobile phones is improving year on year. For me though, you can't beat a laptop when it comes to editing. This segment of the show is sponsored by Escape Technology and HP, who sent through the brand new HP StudioBook G7. So new it's not even released yet. So when they got in touch, as a bit of a computer nerd, my hand was first in the air to give it a bit of a spin. Wildlife photography often conjures up mental images of crawling through wet, cold mud in order to get close to your subjects and generally being a bit uncomfortable. This doesn't have to be the case though. It could be relaxing, calming and, well, maybe not luxurious. Definitely a step up from a cold, wet rock underneath you. I'm talking of course about using hides to get close to your subjects. This is a tried and tested technique the world over to get close to shy, reclusive wildlife that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. Now, patience is a requirement, but you're usually rewarded with those really close views that you just wouldn't be able to get any other way. Once you've managed to grab a few shots of your chosen wildlife subject, you might have to wait before safely exiting the hide in order to avoid disturbing any animals. This, of course, as wildlife photographers, is our #1 priority. What better way to pass the time then than seeing some of those awesome images up on a larger screen and maybe getting ahead of yourself and editing a few of them. The most time-consuming part of editing for me is going through images, culling them and selecting which ones I'm going to keep and which ones I'm going to edit. Bigger advantage, however, is being able to check the quality of your images on the go. You may not know that you've missed focus on a subject until you see it on a larger screen. Better to diagnose any potential problems straight away in case your subject decides to make a return visit. I was in this exact position just a couple of weeks ago while photographing pine martens from hide in the Black Isle here in Scotland. Pine martens can move very quickly, so making sure you have enough shutter speed is crucial. Couple that with low light shooting and you've got quite a challenge on your hands in order to get a nice sharp shot. I knew that the martens were likely to make a couple of visits, so as soon as it disappeared I loaded the images up onto the StudioBook to able to really quickly assess my captures and make sure I was getting the most out of the situation. This particular situation called for speed and processing power, since I didn't know how much time I actually had before the pine martens returned. I'm here in my own hide on the Isle of Skye, built to give me a chance of spotting eagles. And while I wait to see if one of those turns up, I've been photographing some of the other visitors to the moorland and editing them as I go along. Now, this hide's only available for public use during the winter months, so if you'd like any announcements or news on that, be sure to sign up to our newsletter via the link in the description below. Regular viewers of Photography Online will be familiar with our 60 seconds editing segment, and this month I'm going to combine some of the skills we've been looking at into an all-in-one start to finish of one of the pictures I've just taken. So get ready and start the clock. So first of all, I'm going to just give this image a bit of a crop, get rid of that distracting crow just out of focus, bring the top down somewhere about there. I don't try to be too exact. Little bit of a lift to the exposure and the overall shadows and just bring those highlights down. And because this is a raw, give it a punch of contrast. But I'm actually going to add in a bit of vignetting just to darken down the edges. Now I'm going to punch the clarity overall just a bit and then add in an elliptical filter and just darken down the rest of the image just a fraction while taking away a bit of clarity and sharpness. Somewhere about there, maybe one last change to the exposure There we go, and somewhere about there I'd be pretty happy with. So 60 seconds sometimes is all you need. The most common situation most people are going to want to edit while they're away from home is on a photo workshop or a holiday. On all of our trips, we make sure there's plenty of time to review, critique and edit images. This is one of the most important stages of photography if you want to optimize quality control and get the most out of your work. Like with the capture stage, the better tools you have, the better potential your image is going to have and the more enjoyable the process is going to be. If you've been intrigued by the laptop I've been using, then there's a dedicated link in the description below for pre-release information and a discount as well.
If you watched our April show, we were supposed to be bringing that to you from the UK's biggest photographic consumer show, the Photography Show at the NEC in Birmingham. However, as with so many events this year, it was cancelled, but rather than wait a whole year for the opportunity to run the show, the organisers are hosting this year's show online. Now it's going to be really good fun. You are pretty much walking around a virtual auditorium and checking out all the exhibitors in all their virtual booths. All the usual big names will be present and will be there as well as Skye Photo Academy and Worldwide Explorers promoting our trips and workshops. The great thing about this new virtual show is that it's completely free and open to anybody anywhere in the world. The event's held over 2 days, and as well as giving you the chance to look at new products and interact with all the exhibitors, you can also pick up some tips from the live stage talks which will be available. So we've popped a registration link in the description down below, so if you do log in, drop by our stand and say hi, virtually of course. Alright, well now it's time to conclude our 4-part feature on mastering exposure, and so far in the series we've looked at how to measure your camera's dynamic range, how to use your camera's exposure meter, and last month we looked at how to use a histogram. For this final part we're going to look at how to use a handheld light meter, but there will be plenty of generic exposure tips to pick up regardless of what method of exposure you prefer. Enjoy!
In last month's show, we showed you how to use your camera's histogram to master exposure, but this will only be useful if you have a digital camera. If you use one of these, a film camera, then you can look for the histogram all day long, and I can tell you now, you're not going to find it. Now, even some digital cameras have such useless histograms that they're impractical to use, and when this is the case, we need to go to the next level. Use one of these, a handheld light meter. Now these work totally independent of the camera, but they will give you all the information you need to get the perfect exposure every time, but they do require a little bit of knowledge to get the most out of them. Before I picked up a handheld light meter, I'd been taking photos for several years and thought I knew all about exposure. But it wasn't until using a handheld meter that my understanding of tones and how they fit into the range of a camera or film really matured. What this can do, which no camera can do, is measure the light falling onto a subject. In part 1 of this series, we looked at the difference between incident and reflected light, so we won't go into that again, but the advantages of being able to measure incident light removes the process of having to factor in what tone a subject is, something many photographers find difficult to do. So if I want to record a scene as it naturally appears, I can use this to measure the light falling onto it, and theoretically, white should be white, black should be black, and everything in the middle should be recorded faithfully. However, we may not want to record a scene naturally, or if the scene has more dynamic range than our camera or film can record, then we need to decide which end of the exposure, the highlights or the shadows, to bias our calculations on. And this is why using one of these will really help you with your understanding of tones and how they relate to exposure. As well as being able to measure incident light, most handheld meters can also measure reflected light, so they offer the best of both worlds. So let me show you how useful an incident light reading can be. Here we have a beautiful model, sitting in the window light, and as you can see, more light is falling on this side of her face than is falling from this side. So if I measure the light falling from the window onto Ruth's face, I get a reading of f2 and 1/1000th of a second. If I measure the light falling on this side of her face, I'm now getting a reading of f2 at 1/60th of a second. So you can see there's a huge range there. If I expose for the highlight side of her face, then I'm going to end up with what's called a low-key image, which looks like this. And if I expose for the shadow side of her face, we end up with what's called a high-key image, which looks like this. It's my job as a photographer to decide what kind of feel I want in a photo, and using a handheld light meter to measure incident light helps you achieve this. So as you can see, using a handheld meter to measure the light falling onto our subject gives us lots of creative control as to how we want exposure to influence our final result. We can also use the same method for landscapes, but it's probably more useful to measure reflected light from the brightest and darkest areas we want to retain detail in, as this not only allows us to fit as much into the range of our camera or film as possible, but it also trains our eye and develops our understanding of tones which make up the scene. This is particularly important when it comes to the brightest and darkest tones. If you use your camera in an automatic or semi-automatic mode, then do you ever take the time to analyse what might be the brightest or the darkest area of a scene? The chances are that you don't, because you're allowing the camera to do all the work for you. But taking full control of exposure is one of the best ways to improve yourself as a photographer. And that's why in last month's show, we drew the analogy to driving a car, and by not taking control of exposure, you're essentially taking your hands off the steering wheel and you become nothing more than a passenger. So the first thing I need to do is identify the darkest point of the scene that I want to retain detail in. And in this scene here, it's the front of this rock, the bit that's in shadow. Now there are darker points than that in the scene, but they're in the cracks, and I don't care that those go pure black. We don't need detail in there. So I'm going to meter from the front of this rock here, and the light meter's telling me that the exposure at 1/250th of a second, ISO 100, is f2.8. Now it's important to remember that that exposure will render that as a mid-tone, not as a dark. Now we need to do the same with the brightest area of the scene, which is up there towards the sun, the bright clouds. So I'm going to meter for that. And that's telling me that the same speed and the same ISO, it's f32. So we've got a difference between f32 for the brightest point and f2.8 for the darkest point. Now that's a 7-stop gap. The camera that we're using has got a dynamic range of 10 stops, so 7 fits comfortably into 10. If I expose at f32, then I will make the brightest tone appear as a mid-tone, and my shadows will then fall outside the range of the camera. If I expose at f2.8, I will render the darkest tone in the scene as a mid-tone, which will then mean the highlights fall outside the range of the camera. By shooting the scene at f16, I overexpose the brightest area by 2 stops to become close to a pure white, and I underexpose the darkest area by 5 stops to become a deep shadow, giving me the perfect exposure, retaining maximum detail across the luminance range of the scene. The important thing to appreciate is that by using one of these, whether you need it or not, will really help your understanding of exposure and an appreciation for light. A quick note which is worth mentioning is that a handheld light meter is not connected to the camera in any way, so you need to account for any filters or other influences which may affect the exposure, as the light meter has no way of knowing what these are. So the easiest way to do this is to simply adjust the ISO setting. So for example, if I'm using a polarizer, which is reducing the exposure by 2 stops, and I'm using ISO 100, instead of setting 100 on here, I set 25. Because it's 2 stops down, and then it's simply a case of just transferring whatever the settings are on here over to the settings on the camera. When it comes to film photography, other factors you would need to consider would be things like bellows extension and reciprocity failure, but that's for another day. So the important message to take away from this series is that if you're serious about your photography, then you really need to be taking full control of exposure and stop allowing the camera to make the important decisions for you, because as I said before, all you do is become a passenger.
So I hope that that was useful. Now we've been getting many requests to compile all the information that we feature in Essential Camera Skills into one simple to access space, and as a result we've just started working on a new booklet which will consist of the key elements of the information that we've covered this year so that you can keep it with you for reference wherever you are. We hope to have this available in a couple of months, so do watch this space. One thing we aim to do with Photography Online is to make it as interactive as possible. We now premiere the show on the final Sunday of every month, and if you join us for the first viewing at 4 p.m, all the team are available for the duration in the chat window, giving you the chance to have any questions answered during the show. If you watch the show in your own time and have any questions, then do pop those into the comments down below, as we do read and answer every single message. Another way we make the show more interactive is to invite you to send in your images for critique. So, without further ado, let's join Dr. Nick for a thorough examination.
This month we've had loads of submissions for critique. Unfortunately, I haven't got time to go through them all. I'll go through as many as I can, so let's get started. So we've got this image from Andrew Briggs, taken in Whitby in North Yorkshire in England. The main thing for me is the foreground in the image. Just these grasses, dead grasses and whatever, it doesn't really, for me personally, it doesn't really add anything to the image. I would have probably walked around quite a bit. I mean, maybe Andrew did, but I'm just looking for a better viewpoint. I know not too far from this location is the 199 steps, which makes a great foreground. Yes, it may be an overdone location, but it works really well for this particular area. Nice sky and everything. It's just, for me, it's the foreground. We have got another image from Andrew, which is taken in York. For this image, I would have shot it in twilight, so whether that be in the morning or in the evening where the lights come on, it would just add a lot more atmosphere to the image with the kind of the brightly coloured shot fronts and what have you, and the buildings. One other thing is the framing of the tree at the top of the frame. Nothing necessarily wrong with using the tree to frame the image, but just either move your camera left, right or down a bit just to create separation between the building and these bottom branches here. And then the only other one is the branches on the left of the frame just here. Again, I would have excluded them, so you could have moved to the left maybe a bit, or even to the right. Just it's all about viewpoint, Andrew. It can make such a big difference to your image. So moving on to this landscape photograph by Andy Owen. I believe it was taken at the bottom of Clyn Idwal in Snowdonia. The first thing that stands out for me is the fact that the light is in the foreground of this shot. Ideally, I would have waited, if possible, for the light to be hitting the mountains in the background, so the rock area would be in shadow. Just so much better to have the light on the mountains in this image. The foreground is not fully in light, you've just got patches of light in the foreground. So with all the foreground being in shadow, using the waterfall to lead the viewer through to the mountain in the background would have just been so much better. Slight issue I have with the tree, the top right hand of the frame, especially the branches just creeping in to the top right of the frame there. Again, as with the previous image, just viewpoint can make so much difference to your image. Just moving your camera left, right, up or down, it just makes so much difference. And also, just a small thing, if you're going to submit images to us for critique, just make sure they're clean as possible, please. We've got a couple of dust spots just there. So next, moving on to this photograph by Kevin Watts. Now, unfortunately, Kevin hasn't actually mentioned this, but it is so obvious a composite photograph. If we just zoom into the balloons here, you can see this line going around here. So it's so obvious a composite. Even you've got this little bit here, and also this little bit on the balloon here, and you can see the same as on each of the balloons, especially if we go over to this one here, you can see the basket, the balloon, the exact same thing there, and this little bit here. You know, it's so obvious a composite. So, you know, if you're going to send photos to us for critique, you know, say it's a composite, you know, as far as I'm concerned, this is not a photograph, you know, it is a composite. Just one other thing, you know, the figure here doesn't really do anything for the photograph for me. You know, if the figure wasn't there, the balloons were naturally there, it would have just been, so much more a better photograph. However, moving on to the second photograph which Kevin has sent us, it's so much better. It's, it is a photograph in my eyes. And this is Bamburgh Castle in North Yorkshire. Nice kind of foreground there, leading the viewer through the scene there. Yeah, I mean, the only thing that could have been slightly better was maybe just a different bit of light, maybe a higher tide, just filling parts of the foreground area with water, a longer exposure, or the water coming, moving back down from the rocks with a long exposure would have added a bit more to the image. But yeah, so much more than your previous image, Kevin. And moving on to this photograph by Kirk Holt. Got really bags of atmosphere in this image, with a moody cloud hanging over these sunflowers. Just the main thing is the majority of the sunflowers, especially towards the middle and the right of the frame, the sunflowers are pointing in the opposite direction. the sunflowers here, you know, they're looking towards us, so ideally you want all of the sunflowers, or as many of the sunflowers, looking towards the camera. Apart from that, you know, it's got bags of atmosphere in it. And moving on to this image by Ray. Now Ray is giving us a bit of kind of background to this image. What he was trying to do was use a slower shutter speed so that he could pan with the camera to blur the background, and also slow down the movement in the propeller here, which he has done, because obviously if he'd used a faster shutter speed, he would have frozen the propellers, making it look like the aeroplane was just kind of hanging in midair. So he's almost got there. There's just a slight blur in the aeroplane, and also there's just too much space to the right of the aeroplane here. Basically, there's next to no space to the left of the aircraft. If he had the opposite, you know, more room on the left, less room on the right, it would have made it a stronger image, and just, you know, the aircraft being slightly crisper. So yeah, just keep practicing at that, Ray. You know, it will take some time, but you're almost there. And so moving on to the final image by Mike Barney. Now Mike hasn't actually alluded to us that this is a composite, but hopefully you all can see that this is a composite image. You wouldn't have the moon in front of the clouds. So yeah, you know, if you are going to send photographs into us, you know, at least come clean that it is a composite, you know. So unfortunately, Mike, you know, you haven't got any brownie points from us for there. So that's it for this month's Photography Online Surgery. If you'd like your own images critiqued in a future show, you'll find details of how to do that in the description below.
And on the subject of sending in photos, next month sees the deadline for our brand new photo competition, Scotland's Photo of the Year, which has over £4,000 worth of prizes up for grabs. Now, I've been invited to be one of the judges, which I'm quite excited about, and I'll be featuring some of my favourite entries in our December show. The only major requirement for the competition is that the entries are photos of Scotland, the clue's in the name really, but we're not just looking for landscape photos, as anything which captures Scotland will be welcome. For example, its heritage and its history, such as Lewes Castle here on the Isle of Lewes. There is a small entry fee of £5 per image, but all profits do go towards local partner charities, so it's a very worthy cause to get involved in. As ever, full details are down below in the links section. Alright, well, it's the moment many of you have been waiting for as we welcome onto the stage our star student. In this month's episode of School's Out, we explain the Aperture scale, something which confuses photographers of all ages and experiences, let alone an 8-year-old. So, if you've always been confused by why f16 is smaller than f4, then the mystery is about to be solved.
Okay, so you're ready for another lesson?
Yep.
Okay, before we start,
I was born to be ready.
You're born to be ready. Okay, before we start, we need to do the register and make sure everyone's present. So, Shiana?
Yes.
Okay, everybody's here, good. Today we're going to do Aperture. Aperture is these numbers here, 3.5, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22, 32.
And why is that in green?
It's in green because you can lock it there, look.
Or like to stop children from like messing around from it.
It might be to stop children messing around with it, yeah, you might be right. Can you see anything to take a photo of?
Sunset?
Yeah, so don't look at the sun through the camera like that, okay? You must never look at the sun when it's bright through the camera. Do you know why?
Why?
Why do you think? Have a guess.
Because it will be bright for the camera?
No. Something more important than that.
I don't know.
It might be too bright for your eyes and it might damage your eyes. I said just don't, so don't look at it. So let's go out because we need to go out first, don't we?
Uh-huh.
If you look out there, what can you see? What's in the water out there? Over there.
Fog.
There is some fog, yes.
Clouds.
What can you see in the middle of the water over there? Look, it's that dark thing.
What dark thing?
To the right of the sun.
An island.
An island, good. Right, so I think it might look nice with the sun setting and that island in the photo. Do you think?
Okay.
Your decision, you're the photographer, but it's just my suggestion, because you don't want to just take a picture of the sun, do you?
No. So I think I should take a picture of the island.
So your eye level's going to be about there, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
You have a look through there and tell me, because the sun's now quite dim, isn't it? So you can look at it now.
Oh, yeah.
Does that look like a nice photo?
Yeah.
Right, okay, so remember we're going to have a lesson about aperture?
Yeah.
Okay, do you remember what aperture is? What are these numbers, when you change the numbers on the lens here, do you remember what it does?
It makes the hole smaller and bigger, but when you look through here, you can't see it.
Correct. Right, so what it does is it lets more light through and less light through. What you're photographing is very bright, isn't it? So you want a very small hole, yeah?
It's not focused.
Okay, just focus it, it'll just be at infinity. Infinity means a very, very long way away. Do you remember what Buzz Lightyear says?
To infinity and beyond.
Yeah, but there is no beyond infinity. It's impossible to go beyond infinity.
What's beyond?
Beyond means further. There's no further than infinity, because infinity just means as far as possible. But infinity goes on forever. So you can't go beyond forever, can you?
No.
Okay, so infinity just means that it's focused on something that's very, very far away and there's nothing beyond it, okay? Go to 22. A bit more. That's it. That's 22. Okay, these are called F numbers. Okay, and it's a bit confusing, but the big numbers, okay, mean it's a little hole in the lens, and the small numbers mean it's a big hole. So it's quite confusing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But do you know why?
Why?
Because they're fractions. Do you know what a fraction is?
No.
Okay. Do you know what a quarter is?
Quarter is...
Do you know what a quarter of something is?
Not really.
If you have a cake,
Yes.
and you divide it up into 4 pieces,
Yes.
and you take one of them, that's 1/4. Okay?
Okay.
So F4 is 1/4.
Okay.
F8 is 1/8. So if you have a cake and you cut it into 8 pieces, your pieces are going to be smaller than if you only cut it into 4 pieces, aren't they? They're going to be half the size. So F8 is half the size of F4. That's why big numbers mean a little hole. And small numbers mean a big hole. If you had F2, you don't have F2 on this lens, but if you had F2, that would be 1/2. So that'd be quite a lot of cake, wouldn't it? Imagine having a half a cake. So that's why 2 is bigger than 4, and 4 is bigger than 8, and 8 is bigger than 16. So you're on F22. You've cut that cake into 22 pieces. So each piece is only very small. You're still going to be hungry, aren't you? So it's not going to let much light in, is it, at F22, because the hole's very small?
Yeah.
Okay, right, look at that sun, it's almost disappeared.
Oh no!
Right, so...
You've been talking too much.
You have, yes, right, so take the shot. Well, that sounded good, didn't it? And do you remember what you do after you take the photo?
We wind it to the next photo.
That when the sun goes, you're going to still get some nice colour in the sky.
And it's getting smaller! Even smaller! In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The sun has gone to bed.
The sun's gone now, hasn't it? Right. Take another one now. Okay, should we call that a wrap?
What does that mean?
It means call it a day.
Yeah.
It means finished.
Yeah.
Finito. Homeward bound. Give me 5. That wasn't 5, that was like, wasn't even 1. That's it. Right.
My hands are so cold.
Okay, let's go.
She's really enjoying her journey into learning photography, and we'll continue to follow her as she expands her skills. Next time she's looking at her own photos as she learns to develop her own film, so we'll follow along for that as well. Well, that's it for this month's show. Do leave us a comment if you can, and a thumbs up is always appreciated as well. We'll be back with another action-packed show next month. If you can't wait that long though, don't forget our MC2 Live webinar takes place in the middle of every month. We'll also be at the virtual photography show on the 20th and 21st of September. Until then, take good care, but most of all, take good photos.